Welcome to session 3 of World Class Relationships for Work and Home. My name is Judith, and I will be your instructor for today. In this session, we will cover Pillar 4, using power listening, Pillar 5, giving up tit for tat, and Pillar 6, assuming self-responsibility. Let's go ahead and get started. Everyone agrees that listening is essential. It is truly a pillar in life. But when do you need a more skilled type of listening? Also, what does it truly accomplish? How do you go about implementing this type of listening? Let's go ahead and talk about this powerful skill, power listening. So let's start with the foundation. When do you need a more skilled type of listening? I'm going to go ahead and give you some scenarios, but these are just examples, and this is not an extensive list, right? But we know that we need these type of skills when our partner is troubled, right? We're trying to work through something with them, or when we are troubled together and we're trying to resolve a conflict, right? At work, you may have a coworker who is worried about their job or different things, and you can notice this, right? A family member is concerned with their health. A friend might be furious or experiencing a strong emotion about something. Maybe you work in customer service and you have a customer who's really upset about a messed up order. Maybe you have little ones and they are undergoing a lot of pressure, and you can notice the changes in their personality, in their behaviors. These are all signs that a more skilled type of listening is warranted. I also want to point out, we want to use power listening not only when another person is experiencing an uncomfortable or distressing emotion, but we can truly use this skill to our benefit as well when somebody's experiencing a positive emotion and they want to connect with us. So let's use the example of your child, right? Maybe they had a great accomplishment at school and they come home and they want to share this with you. Power listening is also very, very important to use in these moments. Or maybe your partner had a great success at work and they want to bond with you and share it with you. You can use this skill here too. So let's go ahead and look more in depth at what the research shows in regards to power listening. And this is important because sometimes as we're learning these skills, it's a lot of information, a lot of moving pieces, and it's hard for us to stay motivated. But this is a pillar that has so much research behind it. We know that it truly is foundational for success in life. And I want to share some of what we know. Empathy, acceptance, and genuineness. We've been talking about these, right? These are the most powerful ways that you can help another person solve a problem. And good listening is actually the best way to give empathy, acceptance, and genuineness to others. And we're going to go over some of the other things that we do that sometimes we think, this is how I'm showing my empathy, right? This is how I am supporting the other person. But actually, the research shows that it's not always so helpful. So simply learning how to listen and hold space for others in a skilled way is truly what is going to be the most supportive thing that you can do for someone that you care about. Or, like I said, even at work, someone with a problem, a customer, a coworker. Being a good listener is going to give you an understanding that is powerful about the situation and the person. So let's go ahead and look into further segments on this skill. So what are some of the results? What am I going to see if I take the time to learn and implement this skill? Well, when you show another empathy and acceptance in this way, by using this skill, you are creating a beneficial climate that is actually empowering the other person to be able to process through the problem. And we want to be able to do this, right? We don't want to be the ones to have to carry someone else's load. We want to trust and build in them what is needed so that they can also become successful problem solvers. An added benefit is that your partner, right, is truly going to learn and create this trust that when I have something that is taking place, my partner is a good listener and I can go to them and know that I will experience these conditions of empathy and acceptance, and you will become that go-to person. But again, you're not placing the burden upon yourself because you're just creating and facilitating the environment for there to be effective problem solving. Finally, good listening sends a really strong message that you are interested in and you respect the other person's thoughts and feelings, even if you don't share them. This is another important point. I can hold space for you and I can listen to you, even if I don't necessarily feel or think the way that you do. And this is a wonderful way to stay connected and validate them, even in spite of differences of thought or different personalities, right? We want to do this, especially with our children as well. And as they grow up, we're going to really need to know how. All right. So you learn more about your partner's inner life when you use power listening. And again, you do this both when they are bothered by something as well as when they are happy or excited about something positive that's taking place in their lives. So power listening is really a window that you can open up to see into someone else's heart and truly get to know them. At this point, we might be really asking ourselves, all right, Judith, how do we do it? How do we go about implementing power listening? And something that I really want to point out, none of us are born knowing how to communicate. If you have a 2-year-old in your life, you can very easily notice that these are skills that someone else has to come in and teach us, or these are skills that we have to intentionally seek to learn. And I want to highlight some of these pieces. Everyone loves people who are understanding listeners. And sometimes these individuals, they might even feel like they have some special superpowers, right? Because in reality, there are very few good listeners sometimes around. But the truth is that learning and following these rules will make everyone have these special superpowers. So again, we want you to become that person that people that you care about are going to turn to during a time when they want to connect, whether it's something good or even something bad, right? So I'm going to give you this imagery. To grow plants, the rules are give them good soil, water, fertilizer, and sunshine. And if you do, they will grow. If you don't, they won't. To be an understanding listener when your partner or coworker or child needs one, the rules are equally as clear. Let's go ahead and review them. We really want to make sure that we are listening both with our mind, right? But also with our ears and eyes. So I'm going to walk you through what I mean with this, about this in just a moment, right? We want to talk about it, right? So they get a clear picture of their problems and how to handle them, right? You also want to discipline yourself to set aside all judgment and all desire to ask questions and give advice. And this is easier said than done. So we are going to unpack this even further. You want to support them by seeing the world for a while through their eyes. Like I was sharing, it's a window into their heart. You want to also accept them as they are and give them empathy. If you follow these rules, it'll be much easier to implement this skill. And we will talk about it in the following segment. There are 4 kinds of listening skills, and we're going to go ahead and cover each and every one of them so that you can identify which ones you use most on a daily basis, which ones you may want to modify, and new ones that you are going to want to implement. So the first one is regular type of listening. It's the one that you can be using even as you're watching this video. There's reactive type of listening, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is. There's power listening in full, which is the royal standard for listening, and there is power listening light. 2 of these we all do naturally. The other 2 we're going to need to learn. So which ones do we naturally gravitate towards? Regular listening. Like I was sharing, it's the standard way of listening that everyone knows and uses every day. You hear and understand what the speaker is saying. It is perfectly adequate when things are going smoothly and no one is upset. So this is an adequate type of listening. We don't want to discard it. But the caveat is everything needs to be going smooth and no strong emotions are present in the room, right? As an example, you are, as I was sharing, you are using regular listening as you are watching this class, right? You hear and you understand me, and there's no conflict and no one is upset. That is essentially regular listening, but we have 3 more to go ahead and take on and learn about. So let's go ahead and do this in the following segments. The second type of listening that we want to cover today is called reactive listening. This is the listening that unfortunately culture has taught us to use when our partner or others around us have a problem. Yet we know, again, there is extensive research on it. It is not effective. The most common and damaging ways that people respond when they are listening in a reactive way are 3 components. The first one is through judgment. And we can identify this through statements such as, "It's your fault, get over it. If you hadn't been up so late on your iPhone, then you wouldn't be running late today like you always do." We all do it, right? It sounds familiar to us. Advice. This one can seemingly come from a very good-hearted place, but attempting to fix the problem through your good ideas is not supporting your partner and creating that growth environment that we have been talking about. So even when we have the greatest of intentions, the research shows those intentions aren't enough. Advice during a moment when somebody is in distress or experiencing strong emotions is not what they are needing at that specific time. So we want to avoid it. And finally, this one is really hard as well to shift and pivot from our day-to-day dynamics, but asking questions. And again, it can come from such a good-hearted place. I mean, I know sometimes someone is sharing something with me, and even as a therapist, there are times when I would like to ask a question, but I know the research. I trust the process. I trust that the person in front of me is capable, and all they need really is a growth environment with those ingredients, right? Empathy, acceptance, and genuineness, and they will find their way. And we can do this through power listening, right? So let's continue expanding on what these 3 reactive types of listening sounds like so that we can learn to really avoid them. All right, let's say that your coworker starts talking about something that's bothering them, such as, "You know what? I'm so worried as a team we're not going to make our quota this month." And out of fear, right, you might react and you might tell them something like, "Well, you know what? Worrying isn't going to help, right? We have to do X, Y, and Z, right? Or what you need to do is to stop letting Morrison take so many days off and get him to do his job," right? We're trying to do this from a good place because we're also in fear. But again, we're just reacting and we're not really power listening to the person, right? We can also ask questions, right? Why is he taking so many personal days off, right? Why are we even allowing this, or what's going on with him? Or telling them it's their fault and that they're the ones that are wrong, right? "It's not as bad. Cheer up. Oh, you're such a worry worm. You know, the company has survived for 25 years. This is not going to be the end." We can minimize and interject in those ways. And again, we are reacting in an unhelpful way. These are the standard forms of, again, what culture has come to show us or to lead us to think that is helpful, but it really isn't. Unless your partner is very, very dependent and can't think for her or himself, they will feel taken over. They will feel patronized and not respected, or simply not well listened to. And usually what you're going to see is a breakdown in the communication. They will stop talking, right? Or maybe the subject is going to get turned into something else, and it won't be helpful at all. So we need to avoid reactive listening like the plague, especially once again when our partners and coworkers are upset. Let's now look at 2 other forms of listening that are much more beneficial and aren't taught in our culture. We need to learn them very intentionally, but it can be done, and you're well on your way to doing this. Let's go ahead and start learning about power listening. Let's go ahead and talk about the type of listening that, maybe brought you to this program, which is power listening. So what this skill entails is empathically restating your partner's thoughts and feelings to demonstrate your understanding and acceptance. Sometimes called empathic listening, active listening, or reflective listening. It is, as I have mentioned, the royalty of listening skills, and we know it provides maximum support to those around us when they are dealing with a problem. Power listening is truly the most important of these skills, so we will extensively focus on it more later. Power listening light is a skill that finds itself halfway between regular listening when things are going well and smoothly and power listening. This skill simply requires that you turn on your ear and eye to receive and understand all of the verbal and nonverbal expressions from your partner. So very important. Please remind yourself to put away any technology or any distractions, because it is going to require that you tune in to the person in front of you. And it is very straightforward. You are going to want to respond with silent, attentive, regular listening, combined with frequent empathic but contentless sounds. So you're giving encouragement and support without really saying anything meaningful. Some examples are, "Oh, I see. Uh-huh. Really? Wow. I hear you." These are just a few examples of these non-committal responses that you can provide, but make sure to find your own and to use ones that feel natural and good for you. Very important, even starting with power listening light, is that once again, we're going to refrain from judgment, advice, and questions. When you use this skill, you have to commit to swallow all of those judgments, questions, and pieces of advice. Power listening light does not require you to restate your partner's message, but it does require your close empathic attention and empathic sounds to give support to your partner and help them to continue their exploration and processing of their problem. A hidden advantage of getting good at this skill is that after a while, you can begin mentally to start restating the gist of your partner's communication in your head without expressing it. In other words, you can begin to teach yourself power listening while you are practicing power listening light. Let's go ahead and continue working further on these skills. Now that we've reviewed power listening light, let's go ahead and give you the opportunity to begin implementing this skill with your partner. Let's look at directions for the exercise. We want you to think of a subject you have strong feelings about. It can be politics, sports, news, anything that you would like. However, it is very important that the other person is not upset about the subject that you choose. We are still learning this skill, and we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to practice without triggering each other. Go ahead and choose the partner and decide who is A and who is B. A will share 2 to 3 sentences at a time for 1 to 2 minutes, while B will practice power listening light. Once you have completed this exercise as A and B, go ahead and take the time to switch places and repeat. We will provide you with a timer to help you guide and get a sense of the time. let's go over power listening more in depth now. Remember, power listening entails restating the gist of their message with empathy. And by this, we mean their thoughts and feelings. It involves looking, listening, knowing, and once again, restating the message. So let's expand on these further, right? We are looking to see the other person's body language, their facial expressions. We want to be tuned into them, and we want to use even knowledge that we have based on our interactions with them in the past, right? We are wanting to listen both to their words and their tone of voice. And this connects to what I was sharing. We want to know our colleagues. We want to get to know our partners, our families, and those that we care about, right? And the context of the problem. So using this information to tune into their entire message, both verbal and nonverbal, right, will help us to achieve a true understanding or a more in-depth understanding, as well as to do this with empathy. We also want to talk in a new way. Like I was saying, it's like learning how to drive or ride a bike. It is a new skill. It might feel like lots of moving pieces in the beginning, but I promise you it does get easier. And the most important skill to learn is to swallow our judgment, questions, and advice. We really want to avoid these. And in place of that, we want to simply restate what our partner is telling us in our own words. And we want to make sure that we are listening and attending to their thoughts and feelings, at least the ones that we believe that they have expressed. So let's go ahead and cover an example, right? So the spouse has a headache, and instead of responding to her with, you know what, just take an aspirin, or have you taken an aspirin, right? A question. Instead of doing that, you actually take the time to open your eyes and open your ears, turn towards them, and focus on their distress. You notice the distress in your voice. You see the pain in their face, right? You notice that maybe they're walking with less energy, they're tired, and you caringly say, wow, the pain is really bothering you a lot right now. That is power listening. If she says yes, you have succeeded at this skill. And she feels understood, accepted, and cared about, and safe to continue talking and dealing with her pain. And throughout that conversation, you might learn that she has already taken lots of aspirin, right? Or that she's tried many different things. And at this point, she is really tired. You have successfully held the space for her in the most supportive way. If she redirects you and tells you, no, I'm frustrated or upset, I want to remind you, you are still power listening effectively because she is continuing to guide you and express what she is going through. So we need to always remember that we have to leave room for redirection. And what really is a sign here is that they continue opening up and guiding us to their true experience. You will now get to practice this type of listening with your partner. Let's go ahead and do a recap of the 4 kinds of listening. Remember, being a good listener is your most important relationship skill. The research, bar none, shows this. It really helps relationships, and it helps smooth out any areas that you have been struggling to break the pattern of. It's powerful because it gives your partner the gift of empathy, acceptance, and genuineness when they need it the most. And remember, these are the three most powerful conditions that foster relationships and growth. And power listening, uncluttered by your questions or advice, gives deep validation to your partner's thoughts and feelings. Let's go ahead and go over these 4 once again. Remember, there is the regular type of listening, and it can be great when things are going smoothly. It is simply paying attention to and hearing the message of the other person. Reactive listening, this is the one we want to avoid like the plague, and it entails judgment, advice, and questions. We have power listening light, which is the in-between. It is grasping the full meaning and supporting them with silence and those non-committal sounds. It is putting away technology and really turning our body towards the person to give them our full attention. And power listening involves power listening light, but it takes it a step further. It is grasping the full meaning, and now we want to make sure that we restate it in our own words, and we want to do this with empathy and acceptance. Let's get started with pillar number 5, giving up tit for tat. The phrase probably comes from this for that. What do we mean by tit for tat? Well, it is the unfortunate way we so often manipulate others by saying, I only did it because you did it, or you should do it for me because I did it for you. They are put downs, retaliations, and various forms of manipulation. It's even enshrined in aphorisms such as an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. Or you may have heard as well of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Let's unpack this particular pillar. So in order to do that, we first need to learn how to recognize it, right? And we also need to know when we utilize tit for tat. So we often utilize this to throw off criticism. I'll give you an example. Not cleaning the tables at work when it's your turn and saying to your coworker, well, you never clean the tables when you're supposed to, so why should I? Right? So we're throwing off criticism by turning it around towards the other person. We also use it very often when we want to justify something that we feel guilty about. So maybe we don't say this to someone, but we're thinking it deep within us, right? He never cleans his workstation, so why should I clean up mine? Or she never lets me know when she's running late, so why should I text her to let her know? Let's give her a taste of her own medicine, right? Maybe she'll learn. We also use it to retaliate when we are hurting. So again, this can be expressed or simply thought out, but maybe thinking to ourselves, well, he forgot my birthday, so why should I plan something special for his? These are just some examples, but we know from the research once again that these are areas when we tend to rely on tit for tat. So we also have 2 more areas that show up on the research, and it's using fairness as a weapon. It's thinking, I'm always helping him or her, so now they need to do that for me. And we know that sometimes this isn't how life is working out, and we'll expand more on these in just a moment. It also is very common as a part of verbal fencing, right? This is used over and over, almost like a reflex reaction. It is blunt and it retaliates against criticism or even perceived criticism. So in essence, it's a nasty and quick defensive response, right? So maybe she says, I couldn't concentrate because you had the radio on so loud. And like a reflex, he will reply, well, I couldn't do my work because you were talking so loudly on the phone yesterday. And it becomes part of not just this internal dialogue, but it now becomes part of the overt dynamic and this verbal fencing. So these are some of the moments that we need to learn to identify and even just take a moment to explore within ourselves. When do I tend to use tit for tat? Identifying those triggers can be really helpful in helping us to pause, take a moment, and start introducing this skill of giving up tit for tat. So what are some of the problems that tit for tat can bring into our relationship? Why is it that giving up this type of dynamic is a pillar? It is such a foundational pillar that we need to implement right away. Well, first and foremost, it is manipulative, right? Avoiding personal responsibility for your actions by manipulating the other person with their own actions. So I'm not going to do this because you don't do it. And this type of manipulative dynamic does not bode well for our relationships. We know this. It causes a lot, and I mean a lot of resentment, because truly the response that you give, because you're using the other person's behavior, it can seem logical, right? But then the other individual is left with this unresolved resentment. If it works, right, your needs, feelings, and motives remain safely hidden while the other person has to simply take the punishment. So this resentment is not, once again, going to turn into something good in the relationship. It's also very, very damaging. This residual resentment can obviously build up. We can only take so much. And you might find yourself in patterns where you're having the same discussion over and over, and you're getting into these verbal fencing matches, and everyone ends up hurt. Nobody ends up winning. It also corrupts your integrity. It is truly a type of cancer in the relationship. We are going to connect this with another pillar of assuming self-responsibility later on, but if you want to maintain your integrity, you need to learn to identify, when am I drawn into tit for tat? And we need to learn how to give that up. So if it's so damaging, and we all know that we can get locked into these patterns that get us nowhere, why is it then that it's so hard to give up? Why is it that we're so tempted to go into tit for tat? Why is it so attractive? Well, initially it might feel fair, at least to you, not to the other person, but you might get this immediate relief, right? We also, as we have been discussing, it is now embedded in our culture. We see it in shows, we encounter it in movies. It's all around us. It has truly become normalized, and so it feels acceptable and justifiable. It also does something to take care of our uncomfortable feelings that we don't want to sit with and process. One of them can be, right, taking that self-responsibility. These are things that can be harder to do. And it feels like a safe way or a quick way to accomplish your goals and to do it immediately. And it sometimes can, again, be justified. So there might be times when you can do this free of guilt or criticism because you're shielding your behavior with the other person's actions. It seems like an easy way to ride your partner's coattails, not having to take on as much responsibility for your own stuff. But again, as we went over in the previous segment, it is extremely damaging to relationships. It keeps us stuck in these patterns that are very hard to break. And in the long term, all of that resentment that is produced is going to bubble up and explode. And it's really not going to do anything beneficial for our own integrity as individuals or for the health and well-being of our relationships. So how do we avoid tit for tat now that we know what it sounds like, what it is, and we also have gone over some of the damaging effects that it can have? How do I truly avoid it, right? Step number 1, you want to recognize your hidden motives. You want to take responsibility for your actions as well as your emotions and realize that your integrity would otherwise be compromised. The other person's actions are an attempt to meet their own needs and have nothing to do with your needs or motivations. So any attempt to make the other's behavior cause or justify yours is truly illegitimate. Step number 2, we want to make sure that we are responsible for our own needs. We have to deal with not only our own needs, but also our emotions and confront others about them. And we can use this with the skills that you are learning throughout this program, such as soft starts. For example, right, if you're hungry, speak up, let the other person know. We need to stop. I'm a little hungry, right? You don't want to ruin that road trip, sending hints and trying to get the other person to read your mind when you're the one who's responsible for identifying and voicing that need. And yes, ultimately getting it met. We also don't want to let those things fester within us. Maybe they didn't do something special for our birthday and we carry that pain and resentment. Instead of speaking up about it, we retaliate. And when it's time for their birthday, we don't do anything special, right? And again, it's that tit for tat that we are rationalizing inside of our mind. Well, he didn't do it, so why should I? It's important that we step up, that we identify when something is hurting us, and that we are able to voice it in a respectful and effective way. And again, you will be learning how to do this throughout this program, but being responsible for our own needs is essential. And finally, we need to also recognize that the other person is also trying to get their needs met. This might help you become more empathic and be able to confront with a soft start. Again, the other person is simply trying to get a need met, and when we are able to identify a pain point and initiate that conversation, we might be able to hear, right? What is it that was going on for them? And this can be really healing. It can create that empathy and help us see the world, at least for just a moment, from their eyes and point of view. One final recap on tit for tat. We know tit for tat can be or can seem very attractive, but in the long run, it destroys our relationship. It also has the ability to seem legitimate, but as we saw, by taking on self-responsibility and maintaining our own integrity, we begin to realize we cannot shield ourselves behind someone else's behavior. And so though it seems legitimate, we know that it is not. Tit for tat is also dangerous and extremely hurtful to our relationships. So it is something that should absolutely be avoided, and committing to giving up tit for tat is an important process of growing our relationship and implementing the skills that you are learning in this program. Let's talk about pillar number 6, assuming self-responsibility. And I already started introducing a little bit of this concept in our previous skill, which was giving up tit for tat. So let's talk about truly taking responsibility for getting our needs met in life, which is something that we're going to have to do all throughout our lifetime, right? So we want to introduce this concept that your partner is an important assistant need meter. A major reason to get together with your spouse is to find someone who will meet some very special and important needs for us, right? Needs of love, of companionship, of sex, or emotional and financial support. You both took responsibility for getting many important needs met by choosing a partner you hope would help meet them. To the extent that works out, you have achieved your goal and you have seen many of those needs met, right? But while this is one of the many wonderful things about a close and successful relationship, we also need to simply see them as an assistant, but ultimately we are responsible. And this also applies with other relationships, such as those at work. Those relationships are also important for getting some of your needs met, for income, for feeling like you're part of the team, for gaining a sense of accomplishment. All of these things can be done, right, within the context of those relationships at work. But like your family members. And like I was saying, your coworkers might be willing to assist you in meeting some of your needs, but it is very clear that they are definitely not responsible for meeting all of your needs in your life. And so we want to be very, very mindful that they are just there to assist us, right? In the end, you are the primary need meter in your own life. You are responsible for seeing that your needs get met, whether those are big or small. Examples include having the friends you want, right? I cannot tell you how many couples I work with, and this is a big one. And it's a struggle, but ultimately you get to choose those friendships. You get to work on achieving your dreams that you have to identify and work on. You get to choose the job you want, and you get to be successful, but these are things that you have to take on yourself. Even something as simple as being able to see the movies that you really want to see. These are things that sometimes we feel need to be met by our partner, but they're not. Ultimately, they fall on our lap. There is no obligation that binds other people, right? From making sure that all of our needs are going to get met. While we appreciate any support that we receive from others, big or small, we need to remind ourselves in the end, it falls on us to figure out what our needs are and find ways to meet them. Taking the time to voice them and find ways to try to implement them. And if your partner is not becoming that assistant to your needs, take the time to process through it and still search for ways in which you can have some of those met in your life. Let's go ahead and review this concept of self-responsibility one more time. Most of us are aware that taking responsibility for getting our needs met in life is a sign of maturity. But sometimes we forget that this applies even to the small needs. As I was sharing earlier, right? If we're hungry, let's recognize that and let's voice it. Even if we're in a long road trip, it is better to do that than to be miserable during our time together. Even these small needs, they do require that we identify them and that we figure out ways to get them met. When we take responsibility for our own needs, we take the pressure off our partner and others, right? When we do this, it truly does lead to happier and likely stronger relationships with others.
Practice them with your loved ones. As they say, practice makes perfect. Until next time.
See you next time.